Welcome, everyone. My name is Ashish Kaushal. I'm the CEO of Higher Talent and one of the co-founders of Consciously Unbiased. I'm really excited. Today we have the Future of Contingent Workforce series with the Buyers Edition. We have some of the best industry leaders in contingent labor who are going to give their insights into trends of 2024 and, of course, make some predictions this year. In 2023, we discussed the concept of a rolling recession with unemployment rate largely staying the same because the market forces, which include Fed rate increases, congressional spending, which is counter to the Fed rate increases, the reduction of immigration, the trends towards onshoring and nearshoring, as well as retirement rates outpacing the newly entering workforce. All this makes it difficult to reduce wage inflation because of basic supply and demand. 2024 has been kicked off the first quarter, and we've already seen that it's definitely not going to be calm. We came into this year thinking the Fed was going to cut rates, but the stock market surged. History has shown us whenever inflation is high, it tends to repeat itself at least once before it's tamed. Today's PPI report validated that, and the results probably mean a lower number of rate cuts, if any, in 2024. One of the drivers in this is that many multi-year contracts were negotiated last year during high inflation with companies who buy goods and services, and those contracts goes in effect now. 2024 rolls in, and many of the same concerns are still here from 2023, but now we're adding in a complexity of global conflicts breaking out across the world, including 16 presidential elections. Artificial intelligence has taken the world by storm in the mainstream with the advent of interfaces like ChatGPT and Bard, or Gemini, as they call it now. It's given us a taste of what's possible, as well as the potential of reducing wage inflation through AI and automation. Speaking of that, we thought automation was going to replace lower wages, but now we're seeing that it's actually helping replace some of the things that we do in the cognitive class. Some analysts say it could affect 25% of all jobs. Now let's talk about trajectory. Are we still in a faux recession? Did the recession already happen? Are we on the edge of the recession? Today we'll be discussing how generative AI and possible economic downturns and other disruptions are impacting the segment of the workforce. We have an amazing panel of guests today in the contingent who can tell us about contingent workforce trends. They're Brett Klinker, Director of Contingent Workforce Crews, Renee Slamp, Regional Category Management Lead from Munich Re, Angela Westhead, Procurement Manager, Contingent Workforce and BPO at Zendesk, Karen Benalta, Director of External Workforce and Procurement Ops at Transamerica, and Sharon Shank, Program Manager VMS Procurement at DHL. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you.
So let's start off with what are your predictions in 2024? I know we're a quarter in, but there's a lot more to go and there's a lot of turbulence. So Brett, you want to start?
Yeah, I think 2024 is going to be an interesting year. It's an election year, which I think always makes things really fun in the world. If you know, from what we're seeing, I think the busyness or the slowness, I think, really kind of depends on the sector that you're in terms of what you're going to see. So I don't have any big bold predictions for 2024. I feel like I'm very much in a wait and see kind of mode. And then I think once November passes, things will settle down and we'll get into a better rhythm.
Yeah, no, definitely. Sharon, your thoughts?
We were anticipating it was going to be flat from what it was last year. It's actually not what I'm seeing. I think we're slower than what we were last year. And I can't say I feel like it's just the economy and the fact that it's an election year. Election years are always weird and odd, and it's proving to be true for me.
Yeah. Angela, what are your thoughts?
I've given up trying to be a fortune teller at this point. One thing I saw a lot of reaction to recently at ProcureCon, where several of us were, was around workplace safety training. So I think to me that's indicative of a lot of RTO dusting off our memory about what it's like to be in an office and sort of thinking about those ways to contact our contingents in an emergency and what to do when something goes awry on site, or even just how to interact kindly with each other in person. So that's one thing I can see coming.
I love that. And Renee?
What I am seeing is there seems to be more of a trend towards perm placement, at least within Munich Re. This is, I think some of it is just where we are within the growth environment, and the areas that they're looking to grow in are on the direct side. So they want to bring that more in house. The other thing I'm seeing a ton of, and I saw you had it on the agenda, Ash, is the train to employ. I think that that's going to become very, very critical for at least my industry and any insurance financial service industry, specific to insurance because of attrition and retirement rate. But that is becoming a critical aspect. I would say the other reason we're seeing a downturn in contingent, we're seeing an influx of professional services and consultancy service, staff aug, and also managed service. So I think a lot of this contingent work is switching to longer term strategic work under those vehicles. And that in turn is because of a lot of strategic and transitional activities that are going to be happening for the next 3 to 5 years, at least where I sit. So I think that that's kind of a natural progression. Those are probably top 4 or 5 for me.
Okay. We'll come back to that. I have a bunch of questions around that. Karen, go ahead.
Sure. I agree with Angela. It's really hard to kind of predict what this year is going to look like. On the other side, we do see a lot of skills upskilling. We see a lot of D&I initiative. We still have a lot of contingent workers submitted for each position. And it might be the industry, like Renee said, I'm from the insurance industry as well. We do see a lot of managed service, but we still have a big chunk of contingent as well. So it's a little bit of both, a lot of automation this year, focus on enhancement, improving processes, updating systems. It's going to be a very interesting year. We'll see how the election is going to affect it, but so far we're good to a good start, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it is interesting because if you look at the stats from last year, the unemployment rate largely hasn't changed, right? I think across the board, contingent labor has probably gone down double digits in terms of percentage. And we've laid off millions of people on the direct hire side as well. But so that means the work's still getting done. And if the unemployment rate hasn't changed, then we're just reclassifying this into other areas. And so I call it some other work, but have you guys seen your SOW sort of increase tremendously, and just everyone's moving things from contingent to professional services and SOW?
Especially, I think what you're saying, Ashish, we're seeing a lot of that, especially due to the new laws that they've rolled out in New Jersey and Illinois.
Yeah.
The equal pay that affect light industrial workers, that's got a huge impact. Because now in New Jersey, you have to pay the equal pay of what you're paying your permanent people. And even if they've been there for 5-10 years, they're tenured. Well, now you've got a brand new temp that you want to bring in. You've got to pay them the average pay of whatever all your permanents make. So it's almost not fair. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like the laws kind of, it's upsetting the workplace. We're not sure how it's going to affect our permanent employees. And so that's also, so we're seeing a lot of things that maybe used to be contingent. Now they're like, could we relook at this and maybe bring in another company to manage that for us? So it's turning into SOW.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting the laws too, because the laws are kind of contradictory to like where society's going, right? There's a lot of people want to be more contingent focused, and we tend to make laws that are trying to protect the person that we hurt the most, and we end up hurting them more. I'll give you an example. In New York City, when we raised the minimum wage, McDonald's was shut down and redid their facility so that they only needed 4 workers instead of 15 to compensate for the change in compensation structure. And so I think that does seem to be pushing us into SOW a little bit more. Anyone else have any thoughts on this? No. Do you think do you see an increase in trained to perm to get new talent, especially with things like AI where people don't have those skill sets?
Yeah, I think the train to sorry, I'll jump in and go first. I think the train to perm, we're seeing a huge uptick in it. I mean, it's not previously, a lot of it was just within the IT sector. I think we're starting to see a lot more in entry level, especially on the direct side. It also seems to be a really good avenue to be able to utilize some of the goals around DE&I and not only attract new talent, but also look at those DE&I as you're going through it. I think it really, you see effort through that, right? So when it's trained to deploy, you're seeing the effort of how these people are applying themselves through the training aspect of things. And I think it's very telling to what type of employee they'll be as well. So we're seeing that it's been very, very helpful for us. I don't think we're doing enough of it. I think that there is a need regionally and globally to grow that. But I do think that companies that have that as an aspect to deploy are going to do the best in the next couple of years, at least within the insurance arena.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Brett, do you have anything around that?
We're not doing anything in our world in terms of train to perm, so I'm definitely not the expert on this. I'm defer to Renee.
Yeah,
Right.
I think it's probably slightly different in tech, like where Brett and I are, because we expect you to come in and hit the ground running. We don't have time to train.
Yeah.
We're not interested in bringing you in unless you can sort of day one and be productive with the team.
Well, interestingly, when they're coming into you is when they're already trained. So the companies that you're partnering with, you're putting the ownership on them to train them up to what your core skill set is. So you're not even making the decision to hire until they've proven the fact that they can reach that skill set. That's why we're seeing it, right? So Angela, by the time you see it, they should already be to the level that you're expecting. They may not have been, and you can co-pilot what these training sessions look like, right? So depending on what the systems are, or if they're on the direct side or it's internal IP, whatever the case may be, you're setting the training standards for what they'll be tested on. And so that's where I think it's been beneficial.
That's pretty cool. That's neat. And we do have something kind of similar that we've been working on, just because we've been trying to expand into other geographies outside of the US. And so we have been, to the point about statement of work, we have been working on statement of work where we're kind of like setting up teams in a box in that way. And then bringing them on board and kind of like showing them the Zendesk way, but not really being involved in that sort of hand-holding training. But I think, again, like if we're all kind of wanting to like grow teams at scale in a speedy way, then either one of those levers is a really interesting way to do it.
Yeah, I think it maybe ties into another trend that we're seeing getting more emphasis now than ever, which is client experience, right? And that client experience is both internal, external, heavy focus on internal, because employee retention becomes very, very important when you're starting to see these attrition and these retirement rates as high as they are. So we're seeing a lot of focus around client journey mapping, internal client journey mapping, employee satisfaction, employee engagement, right? So cultural initiatives, change management initiatives. We're seeing a big focus on, which I think is great, right? Whether, and these things are offered, by the way, both if you're contingent or you're perm, right? And I think that that's wonderful, because no matter where you sit, you should feel like you belong. People stay for people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Brett, going back to what Sharon said about the laws changing, I remember when you and I first started talking about Cruise, you had built a very dynamic global workforce to sort of get talent where you needed them, when you needed them, and if anything happened around that. So has that been accelerated through all these legal changes that you're having to navigate?
I mean, look, COVID took the workforce and kind of blew it across the entire world. So you had to get really creative on where talent is. You have to really sort of meet them where they're at and find where they're at. And that presents a lot of different legal challenges. So, for us, we're a relatively small footprint as a company. We have operations mainly in the United States, San Francisco, Phoenix, things like that. But our contractor workforce is spread across almost 30 countries. supporting all of our different departments. And so it's been a heck of an interesting challenge to keep up with the trends, and especially globally. And so, yeah, I would say it definitely has accelerated in the way that the workforce is now moving and it's spread out across the globe. It's had a huge impact on that.
Yeah,
I'll
absolutely.
add to that. I think that actually one of the advantages, if I can say that, of COVID was the fact that all of us started working remotely. So it did open us up to a lot of markets, a lot of abilities to hire in different states and different locations, work with resources all over, which is really helping for the DE&I initiatives that we're having, being able to hire in untapped communities that we've never done that before. And I think that those laws, California equal pay or reporting requirements, and all of those are affecting it for sure. But it's also, there are huge advantages to having a footprint in those locations as well.
Definitely. And so you're doing a lot with international as well, right?
Yeah, we've had transformational couple of years here, and I don't know if the genesis of it was COVID and just sort of like the crystallization that good talent can be anywhere, or some of the other changes that we've had as a company and locations we've grown into. Could be a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But I am absolutely a firm believer that talent can be anywhere, and it's about how you enable them to show up. So we can be a distributed team and work well together as long as we're conscious about how we communicate, about when we communicate, and that we do get FaceTime together occasionally. I'm from a completely distributed internal team, and we had never really met in person before, but last year we spent a week in Dublin together, and it was incredible. And just that 1 week of concentrated working together, FaceTime, unified our team in a way that I haven't seen from teams that sit next to each other for 3 and 4 years. But again, it comes back to like how you're consciously showing up at work and connecting with your team.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. I think, and that on time, everybody in a different place than where they sit when you come together is also critically important, right? So everybody's uncomfortable, no one's sitting in their home office. We did something very similar when, we're shared service within the US, right? So similar to you, my team is all over the US, and in Canada. But I also have team members in UK and Munich and Singapore and South America. And a few years ago, when we truly became a global team, the first thing we did was come together, and we did it in Bavaria. Same thing. It was a week and it was concentrated, but the bonds you create by being together for that period of time, because the silos is what will kill you, and the regional silos are the most difficult, because in addition to distance, you have cultural differences, right? But I think it's like anything. If you attack those head on and you address them immediately, that week translates to years, right? Because people build bonds, they build relationships, trust, and that is really what's going to make a team successful.
I think and just to hammer that even home more, I know for our organization, DEI is incredibly important, and the ability to work remotely from wherever builds incredible inclusion for me as a parent. And I know most of us on the call are parents, right? So being able to be present for our children and still be exceptionally high performing at building our contingent workforce programs is enabled by being able to live where we need to live, but then be able to go and really concentrate on being part of that team. So I think it's a really strong value add.
No, absolutely. So Dean, you guys have mentioned D&I a few times. We're going to talk about that a little later, but since you brought it up, we'll go into it now. So the laws are sort of, the political environment right now is sort of anti that piece. And I kind of, there's certain parts I do agree with it, where you have to get the inclusion right before you can get the D and the E going.
Sure.
And I think we kind of jumped past the inclusion piece and started trying to push DEI a little too early from a societal standpoint. Having said that, the reality is that the workforce is becoming more and more diverse, and so is your customer base. And so even though some politicians may be pushing against it, I haven't seen a downturn in that policy for companies, because they realize it's not an option anymore. It's a requirement to make sure it's part of their passion and part of their delivery. Have you guys seen that as well?
Oh yeah.
Arms.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I could probably go on about this for 1,000 years, but I think like regardless of like what the law says, I think that when you're a company and you're marketing yourself to job seekers, especially millennials, Gen Z, like we're looking for that as part of sort of like the total employment package. Like, are you being mindful about inclusion? The data around Gen Z when they're selecting an employer is wild. They are so big on inclusion. They bring it to the workforce with them. So if you want to become the employer of choice, whether it's for FTEs or for contingents, there's going to have to be some lens of inclusion that's really strongly based into your value proposition when you're recruiting.
No, absolutely. And if you want to reduce inflation, you have to get more immigration, right? It's my shirt.
That's awesome.
I do love that.
No spice.
Although as the daughter
Good
of a
one.
Canadian immigrant, I'm not sure how spicy.
Are the cost models for delivery changing? And where's the cost savings this year?
I think negotiation, rate cards implementation, monitoring markups if you are including markups in your program, or at least making sure they have a fair pay. Doing a lot of market research and best practices and making sure we're paying what we're supposed to be paying, and actually looking at level of positions. Many cases we are opening an entry level, but then you get this senior level person with all the set skills that the manager would have liked 5 years down the road, and they'll make the decision to hire that person right now. So just making sure that the needs align with actually the job requirements is a key for that, for sure. And a lot of supplier optimization as always.
Yeah.
I think in tech for like the years that preceded, it got a little wild west, like where we're just going to pay whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And now that the macroeconomic environment has changed considerably, we're starting to really think, oh, what are we paying? Like, is this in line with market rate? We still want to be the employer of choice. We still want to be who you want to come to. We want to pay you what you're worth. But we're starting to really be more mindful about it and making sure that we're in line with market and we're not just throwing money at people to get them to join.
I think the other critical piece with that is it the bill rate that's increasing, or is it the pay rate that's increasing, right? Because if you're coming back to me and you're saying I want to increase my bill rate, I want to know why. Is it because this great candidate that is only going to choose this job if they get X is where this money is going to? Or and I think that that's part of it, right? Is asking for the transparency around that. I can tell you from the Munich Re side, because we had to go out to market like many in the middle of, where we had huge cost increases, right? And so the way we tried to counteract that is to do a 2-year, which is difficult because it's a difficult activity to go through and start and complete, and then all the governance activities and compliance and everything anyway. So it feels like as soon as you finish, you're starting again, right? But again, industry reports said in 2 years, things should calm down. And so we want to be cognizant of that. And we don't want to lock in to something that's going to be so high that you're now not going to be able to reduce, right? So we're definitely seeing that as an issue. I mean, we had done some reverse auctions to try to at least make it fair, not only for us, but also for the suppliers, right? Like, we're showing you where you rank. We're being obvious to how our internal clients will see what the pricing is. What the other way that we've increased transparency to internal client around it is making sure that we're utilizing all the functionality of our P2P to show the internal client, similar to a VMS. If you choose X, here's a price point, but you could also choose ABCD, and here are their price points, right? So they're being more cognizant of that as they're making choices of how to move forward. In the end, I think it always comes down to the resource, and it always will, right? As it should, because you're only going to be as good as the resources you're selecting for your team. But I do think in this kind of muddy waters, there are avenues of transparency that we can give to the suppliers and to our users.
Mhm.
But I do think it's a two-way street, right? And like, if the whole point of the conversation is buyer perspective, I do want to be able to communicate to our supplier partners out there that I want you to see me as an advocate for your business within my company. So if you come to me and say, well, I need to bring the bill rate up to X, educate me. Tell me why. Tell me. I've had suppliers before that have said to me, well, I don't need to tell you what my profit margin is. And I'm like, you are missing the point. I don't care about your profit margin. You are a business and I fully expect you to be making a profit margin. But if my job is to go back and advocate for your business, to grow my program, to drive compliance within the organization, I can't just go back to a manager and say, guess what, buddy? It's going to cost 10% more this year just because. I need to be able to transparently and clearly communicate what we're paying more for. Because at the end of the day, if we want to drive retention, if we want to drive inclusion, if we want to drive people saying great things about my company when we leave, we want them to be paid well. And so if the fact of the matter is this is just what this talent costs now, or there's statutories because it's got the healthy San Francisco fee attached to it, educate me so that I can educate the business.
I think it's also, I think, Angela, you're in a similar situation to me, right? Because you're not just seeing it on the contingent side, right? I have strategy house, I have consultancy service, I have managed service and BPO, similar to you, right? And my whole thing is I also do all of those negotiations. So, it's interesting, like, for instance, taking consultancy service and then that lends to SOW, right? Because you could technically be looking in other avenues for the skill set. That area, the inflation of rate cards, was absolute insanity. I mean, insanity to what the percentage increases are. And yet on the BPO side, not as much, right? They were very cognizant about staying in line with inflation or even trying to go slightly below inflation, but making sure that they were giving their folks proper increases, proper bonuses, right? Again, these are still resources doing a skill set. So why should it be so different? And to answer just from my perspective, the question around why do we need to know about your cost plus? If your cost plus is 20% higher than everybody else, and as an organization, you are not looking at why, that's a problem for you. That means your overhead costs are way, way too high for the services you are providing. You should be doing some internal strategy and reflection and BPI within your own organization, not passing it on to me based on your inefficiencies, right? And so suppliers also should be evaluated for that. If there's one or two that are like this and everybody else is in line, that's a story to be told. And it's something that should be communicated back to the business, especially if they're a heavy volume user. You're not paying for the resource, you're paying for the company.
Yeah. So I'm going to speak up just because I'm not saying too much, but I think I'm very different from the rest of you guys because at DHL, I'm primarily hiring probably more, I said 90, probably more than 95% is all light industrial. So I'm doing laborers, pickers, packers. So, and right now, just with, I think the economy is kind of slow. And so we are taking advantage of being slower in our business units. So we are taking this time to renegotiate and we're doing like smart bundling. We've created temporary labor geographic areas. So now when we go out to bid, we're not saying, yeah, you're bidding just to be an approved vendor and good luck, happy hunting, go find your business. We're saying, all right, we're going to give you and make you the primary at these 9 locations, which, last year's spend was worth about X amount of million. Now you are the primary, you're guaranteed spend. So we're seeing our rates, markup rates come down tremendously. But when it comes to we have no BPO, it's a different work environment, I think, for me than you guys.
Yeah. I'll add on to Sharon's too. I mean, I've been a cruise now almost 5 years. Before that, I was at Uber for 4, and we dealt heavily in that light industrial category. Not necessarily picker, packer, forklift driver, but much more from a pay perspective, that $20 to $30 an hour range. And what I've seen over the last 9 years is that is a sector of the workforce that was underappreciated, undervalued, underutilized. And with the advent of all these service companies, your Ubers, your Lyfts, your DoorDash, your Instacarts, they have now been sort of coveted as like a very valuable population because you need them in order to enable those services. And so I've seen from a cost perspective, the wages for those workers go way up. I mean, 50 to 100% increases over time when typically they were very stable. And so it does make it a bit of a challenge from a cost perspective when you engage with that workforce to try to control it, especially if it's one of your primary workforces. So, for us, we use a fixed markup model in the US as one way to control it. But in terms of what do we do outside of the US, we do a lot of cost comparisons between what is this person, we benchmark against, San Francisco. What am I going to have to pay for an engineer in San Francisco? I can get 2 or 3 of those guys in Germany or India or wherever. And the business will often make the decision to go more global, which is why we have this workforce across 29 countries, even though we're live in 2 states in the United States, to help mitigate a lot of that cost control. And you get great talent now. Not that you didn't before necessarily, but like there's much more talent available globally today than there was 3 or 4 years ago. And it makes it's so much easier to engage globally now, I feel like, than really ever before.
Yeah, I agree. You get 24-hour cycles of people working if you need them to, right? So they can do handoffs and stuff across tech.
So I was going to say something similar to what Brett just said, which is my own personal team. There's 7 of us. 2 of my team are in Mexico City, which is really nice because of the time difference. So it's like my team leaves at 5 and they're still there till technically my time 7. So we've got better coverage for the West Coast and stuff like that. But it's a different world. It's definitely changed since COVID, I think.
Yeah, nearshore has been strong trend that we've seen because of those hours, because they're closer, because it's easier. But also one of the things I wanted to say was about everybody knows that about 20% of the suppliers are responsible for 80% of the work. It's been probably globally, regardless of industry, across every single segment in the contingent workforce area. So not always just doing supplier optimization and focusing on those 20% of the suppliers and letting them have a bigger piece of the pie has been extremely helpful in negotiation, because if they're getting 100 positions a year compared to 2, they are more likely to give us better rates, be more competitive, and the quality will be a lot better because they know what we need a lot better than before.
Yeah.
Good point, Karen.
Absolutely. So what you're all saying is that you're not looking to just have your vendors work for food. You actually just want it to be a partnership and be fair on the markups.
And that's actually a new trend. Well, not really new, but we are starting to call our suppliers partners. And I think that this mind is shifting. It's a mind shift for everybody because it's a partnership. We are doing business together. We don't expect them to just adhere to what we say. We actually want to get that feedback, just like Angela said. It's a 2-way discussion about everything. We're telling them our needs. We want to hear them. They are our feet on the ground. They will tell us what's going on in the market. If our rates are completely too low or the requirements are too complex to find somebody, they will brainstorm with us ideas on how to fill those needs that we have.
Definitely. So you hear a lot in the news, or everyone's just talking about AI. In my last LinkedIn Live, I said, if you have any questions about AI, ask ChatGPT, but I would love to. I feel like I remember 97 when they were talking about the internet's going to change everything, and it did change everything, but it didn't change everything in 97. And I feel like we're right now in that sort of early stages of you have to use AI just to be relevant, but is it really productive yet? I'm not sure. What are you looking for, one, from your vendors and how they implemented AI for your organizations when you're evaluating vendors? And number 2, how do you feel it's going to affect your companies in the next 3 years? And what initiatives do you have in place?
Yeah, I can kick that one off. So at Zendesk, we're bullish on AI, right? We're a customer service software enablement company, and so we've got a lot of how we're adding in AI to our tool to make customer service journey much less manual and much less frustrating. And realistically, I think that's where we are as a society with AI, right? We're not a generative AI. No one's got like a robot walking around their house telling them what to do. We are just taking manual tasks or tasks that take extra thought, and we are automating them. So when I am looking at that through a partnership lens, I want to see my partners being realistic and thoughtful about how they're using AI. And in our particular space, for me, that means not having it completely replace your recruiters, right? I love an ATS with skills match, but I also feel like that doesn't always tell the whole story. I still like having, you're walking me through your recruitment process. If I'm having a vetting conversation with you about supporting my program in some way, I want to know that you have human touch points and that you're being thoughtful about how you're taking tasks off of your team so that they can really invest in the human aspect of recruitment. So that's kind of like where my brain is. Anybody else?
Yeah, I agree completely. And we are literally looking to our suppliers to actually implement and make the processes a little bit easier for them. Internally, of course, we do have some concerns about the use of AI, especially generative AI, with all proprietary information. We have to make sure that everything is fully approved that we can use before we can share anything. But I think that the core is exactly just what Angela said, to make processes a lot more automated, take less time, less manual intervention, data will be a lot cleaner. So there are a lot of advantages. And though we are not the first adopters, probably, we're kind of sitting down and watching, doing a little bit of implementation. We're definitely looking at it as a positive change that will affect everybody for the best in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Renee?
I think I would agree. It's hugely helpful in customer service. I think, customer service, I think in claims for us, I think, the direct hiring side, super helpful. I think that there are options out there that could certainly aid and help to upskill our TAs, right? And free up some time for them to work on other things. I think when you think of it more as enhancement or BPI rather than replacement, it makes me a little bit more comfortable. But I think it should always be viewed in the lens of whatever the experience is for the person ingesting it. I think it's a tough sell. To Angela's point, I've found that a lot of this is a tough sell with HR because they don't necessarily see it always as a value add. And a little bit of that could be protect the vest. But I do think it's a delicate balance. And as different organizations, you need to allow people that growth motive as these new tools and things come in, which is going to assist them. The word there is to assist them in what they're doing. And I think immediately people get the reaction of it's going to replace me. I think it's also, any of these things are only going to be as good as the change management program that comes with it, and making sure that that is a continuum. You can have the best tools in the world. If nobody's using them, they don't help.
Right.
100%. And you also think about like in the 90s when we came up with the internet, there was no content manager job. There was no graphic user interface role, right? And so I do see like 1,000 new jobs getting created from AI too, right? Curators and things like that. So opportunities. Yeah. Brett, I'd love your perspective because you guys are pretty much an AI company.
Yes, we are. I would I think there's a couple perspectives here. So one, I would add on to Angela's point of view from earlier. And I think from the supplier perspective, like I don't want to see AI replace the recruiter. I think I want to see it make their job a lot easier and more efficient, which will help serve us in the long run, right? Reduce time to fills, have a better manager experience when they engage with the partners, all those types of things. But we haven't really talked like the tech side. Like if the VMSs can take AI and actually implement it in the right way, and AI keeps developing the way that it is going to have a massive impact on the amount of operational burden that these tools currently require. Yes. And I would suspect that would probably have a large impact on the MSP industry in the future. And hopefully they can become more strategic and they can become the thing that we've always talked about, and less sort of viewed as like this tactical support function that you have to have. And so I know we use Vinly. I'm putting a lot of pressure on Vinly to focus on AI. We're having a lot of questions about how are you going to implement it? What's it going to be doing? So I encourage everyone out there to talk to your VMSs and have them make this a big priority for them, because it'll change, I think, the landscape of how we run programs in the future if it's done right.
I agree. I think
that's a great point.
Yeah.
I have
Everybody.
everybody all at once. I have an MSP background. I was in the MSP space for 7 years, and I shared it too. So like I think we all know kind of like what's under the hood, right? And it doesn't really matter. We're talking about like one particular VMS. Like I feel like wherever you go, there you are sometimes. And the amount of manual work that happens within a VMS is astonishing. And this is just queued up for better data integrity, increased candidate experience, increased hiring manager experience. It could be a much more seamless process. But I also think it will be better for program delivery teams. Like I come from a perspective where I want my program delivery team embedded in the business. I want them with managers. I want them dialed in on candidate experience. And you simply can't deliver on that given like the current structure of MSP if you don't have a lot of this manual stuff taken off of your plate. So it just kind of drives back to like the best use case for AI right now is taking that manual stuff off of your plate so that you can really delve into like the thought work and the customer service that's key for program adoption.
So Angela, I can't tell you how many of my supplier partners are calling me saying, hey, we have this new tool and it can send out a text message to all the people like 15 minutes before the shift starts, and they can click yes or no, am I going to show up? I'm like, that's great that you have that. But I don't want you to have it. I want my VMS to have it. And like that way, everybody, is getting the same benefit. And also my managers aren't having to log into 5 different agencies apps to say, yeah, that person was a good worker for, this shift. And yes, they're welcome to come back. And I score them a 9 out of a 10. Or I'm like, they don't want to log in at 5 different apps. I'm like, if they put it all in my VMS tool. So every time one of my supplier partners calls me and says, look what I have, I'm like, you need to call Beeline and you need to show Beeline, because Beeline would probably eat that up. They would probably love that.
Yeah.
I'm like, I would love that. Tell Beeline Sharon told you to call them. I'm like, see if it helps. I don't know. Probably not, but you never know.
But it's a good point. I feel like if you look at the landscape of MSP VMS over the last 5 years, there has been sort of like, I call it the hungry hippo acquisition spree, right? Just like chomp, chomp, chomp. So like the number of players are getting smaller, and ostensibly the amount of technology should be getting better, right? But I don't necessarily see all of those integrations or they're not necessarily being marketed very well. So I think you're onto something, Sharon.
I think there's probably a little bit of a domain protection thing. I'm big now. I don't want to give up any market share, and that's why you have all these like apps coming out that are kind of replace some of this stuff. But I think ultimately, like what Brett said, is the VMS has to handle it. And so, because how many apps are you going to install on your platform, on your base, right? And with cybersecurity, it's even more of an issue. So, and then the MSPs are probably resisting some level of automation because it does require a different sort of business model.
These are the questions that keep me awake at night, though, because I'm kind of like, are we going backwards to go forwards here? Because the whole point was to consolidate under one, but then you consolidate under one and then you've got like 15 add-ons. Are we not just moving backwards here? So we'll see. Time will tell.
Let's talk philosophically real quick about like the MSP cost model and like what I think AI can actually do for it. I think all of us, when we have conversations with our MSPs, it generates a lot around cost, focuses a lot around cost. Like, I need more heads. Oh, okay, you're only making a certain amount of dollars, right? They charge a percent per fee or type of model. And I'm really curious to see if AI, done right, will actually eliminate a lot of that conversation, right? I mean, it's one of the, so it's funny, I was thinking about this morning, it's one of the only industries in the world where we just really negotiate the heck out of their fees. Like the guy who mows your lawn, you're not going to sit there and negotiate his fees to the floor. And you go to the grocery store, and I'm not going to negotiate with the manager about the price of bread. But for some reason, with labor services, we negotiate these guys down to the felt, and then we expect the moon and the stars. Yeah. And so with MSP specifically, if AI can eliminate a lot of that overhead from the button pushing, so to speak, then maybe their cost model actually works as it sits, and they can invest in those strategic level players and strategic level conversations, and they actually become that value added model that we've all look for and we need as a partner in our spaces, because there's only one of us at a company and we can't know everything about the world. We really need that level of support, and so I'm hoping AI it can really enable that model as we go forward.
I think to that point though, Brett, like what I think about is when I think about like the fee structure of an MSP or a VMS, realistically, we have negotiated a lot of this to death, and there hasn't been a lot of growth, right, in what we're charging. So I almost wonder, by the time it gets to the point where we have baked in this AI, are we going to see significant cost reduction? Because what the cost that we're actually paying right now has not inflated with the cost of everything else. And AI does cost time and money, right? So it'll be interesting to see what those numbers actually look like as we move towards that.
I don't think that the costs would actually go down, and I'd be fine if my costs didn't go down. I think the value that you get from the MSP will go up. And I think we'd all be more comfortable paying the prices that we're paying. If my managers have an amazing experience, whether AI is doing it or a human is doing it, that's really what I'm interested in at the end of the day, right? And it's more seamless. It connects to all of our apps, all those wonderful things that we want.
Yeah.
But one of the challenges that we talk about on the MSP side in terms of like, I get asked all the time, like, which MSP is the best? Which MSP is the best? We use AGS, so of course they're the best. But the challenge always comes down to it's the team that you get on your account. And one of the things that I've seen historically in the MSP space is it's tough to keep that talent. When you find someone good, they get picked almost immediately over to the buyer side. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that we've negotiated the fees so low, they can't afford necessarily to invest in the talent the way that we do internally. And so I do feel like if AI can come in, reduce a lot of that, the overhead, the burden, the button pushing, so to speak, that leave the prices as they are, and then you can invest in, those higher level items, the strategic conversations, the higher level players, and they'll actually stay, right, and be in that industry for a long time and be a much bigger value add to us than maybe they are today.
100%.
Yeah, I agree.
Maybe there's something about career pathing for your team that's your MSP team, and working with the client side.
We don't have an MSP. Me and my team are the MSP, so we're internal.
Yeah.
Same.
So.
And I'll just say one other comment about that. I think that we view AI not as reducing necessarily the salary or the rates we pay, the bill rates to the suppliers. I think we're looking at it as the advantage of making the processes easier and cutting out hours of work on our end, especially as an in-house run program. The amount of repetitive tasks, and even for the suppliers, the quality of the candidates they'll be able to source, maybe using less of third parties. So maybe that will drive the bill rates down a little bit because it will make things a little bit more efficient. The quality will go up. And I think that that's worth more than the AI cost by far. That's why I'm so excited about all of this.
Yeah, definitely. Let's talk about direct sourcing. So I've been hearing a lot about it, and the things that come to my mind are, number one, why do you need a second platform to do that? Why can't the VMS do that? Number two, if your brand isn't super powerful in the consumer market, then a lot of times just putting up a site doesn't make them come and apply. And number three is, with unemployment at 3.5%, why aren't we spending more time on candidate reusability than sort of trying to go out and find the next person who's no longer here, right? And there's a process thing. And so I've kind of pushed the clients, like, if you came back to your supplier community and said, hey, let's say Brett's working on a project and they have a 2-year tender limit and Brett's only been in there for 6 months and his project's about to expire, why can't the VMS send an email to the program manager and say, hey, is Brett eligible for rehire? Is he getting extended? If it's yes, he's eligible for rehire. No, he's not getting extended because we don't have budget. Then let the VMS kind of sell to Brett while he's on site, and then come back to me and say, hey, I know he bills under you, but I'm going to have you take a 4% discount because we've redeployed him on your behalf. And so that way everyone wins the supply chain, you hold on to talent. And I feel like the reusability rate would go up to like 60, 70% instead of getting the margins of 3 to 5% extra spend on direct sourcing, because historically we've seen there's only 1 or 2 programs that actually really have captured that.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts around this?
I think you're definitely onto something for sure, because I think the cost of keeping a contingent worker is less expensive than refining them. And a lot of the time, they'll make that switch too. If they're looking for somebody contingent over a period of time and they cannot fill it, they're going to switch it to perm, right? And then most of the time you're going to have your TAs working on it for several weeks, and now you're paying a 20 to 35% markup to have likely the same set of companies go out there and doing your direct sourcing for you, right? One of the things that I think, or at least what intrigued me about a direct sourcing platform in the meantime, is not having an MSP and having some limitations of what we could do through Success Factor and other things that were promised, right? But more importantly, when we talk about D&I and we talk about attracting young talent coming in and people that can stay for long periods of time, I think it's being able to run targeted campaigns. And I think, Angela, to your point, and Karen, to yours earlier, right? When the TA teams are taxed, they're not able to go after these important initiatives, which is spending that time. And if they're just coming and saying, I cannot do it, we need to be able to provide something that will. I agree with Brett completely and what you said, Ash. Ideally, for VMS systems to also be able to be not just plugged in, but not just a partner, but have their own direct sourcing to plug into theirs. For me, it would make it a game changer for me.
At DHL internally, we do have our own recruitment centers where we can recruit for perm and even seasonal people. So our HR department really doesn't see the need. They think that we would be competing for the same pool of candidates. And keep in mind, I'm light industrial, so we can hire people off the street with no experience. So they just feel like it would add another layer of complexity. So
True.
we haven't decided to go down that path yet, at least not yet at DHL. We're not interested in a direct sourcing platform.
And Jen, you bring up a good point, because it's not always, it might be a niche area that works with, it doesn't have to be a blanket thing that works across everybody. So I think it makes sense not to do it with what you have.
I'm still waiting for someone to sell me on direct sourcing. That is not an invitation. Because
You said it.
I know. LinkedIn inbox 50,000. We don't have volume, right? We don't really have repeatable staff augmentation right now. So I feel like I see the value in direct sourcing, but for a company like mine, actually, I don't know if I see that. I take back what I said. I don't know. For us, though, I don't really see the value because it's not repeatable. That said, with TA teams, especially in the tech sector, getting obliterated last year, I can see why it might be a good thing to have. But I think for our use case, redeployment makes more sense, right? Like the automation of the candidates that are already in the tool, being able to show like immediate cost savings of whatever percent off, that makes much more sense for us than going through an entire activity of branding a job portal and whatnot, because we would just be, there's just not the repeatable or the volume.
And a lot of them are now looking at contingent as part of that platform, right? So where is that separation of duty? What does that mean with our curators, right? And also, Brett, we've talked a lot about how we beat down MSP price. I sometimes look at the MSP market. I'm like, how are these people making money, right? Now on the direct sourcing side, their cost model is very transparent, but to your point, Angela, it's your volume's got to be very high to be able to get the business case passed for that initial budget. And by the way, that budget escalates as time goes up, right? So that's I think it's the correct tool where it's needed. You have to have the volume. Should it sit it should be one that sits at standalone. If you don't have MSP VMS, you need all that functionality, or it needs to be embedded within VMS. So, would be ideal, I think.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think the amount of time that we spend as an industry talking about this topic at every conference and every meetup that we do for the actual value that it provides to our programs is somewhat mind blowing. I mean, this is really intended to be an additional. It's an additional way to get talent, and then oftentimes, to Angela's point, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. But it may provide 1% or less of your total headcount. So, but there's a ton of administrative burden that comes with it. Regardless of what all the platforms out there will tell you is a great thing. I don't say all this to knock direct sourcing. There's value there, but you have to really be committed to it to make it work. And then Ash, in your example about redeployment with tenure policies, we tried that at Gap probably 10 years ago, the redeployment. And what we found is once managers, it was an interesting case in manager behavior, because once managers found out they had a limit, they didn't want to let their worker go. They kept them up until the limit. And so there wasn't the ability to redeploy. Nobody was letting people go early. And so it's one of the unintended consequences of a tenure policy. And we can have a whole topic about tenure. I am not a fan of tenure at all. It creates a whole host of bad behaviors within an organization. But it does create a blocker to redeployment significantly.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of that, should we get rid of tenure limits?
Yes. Please, anyway, sorry to my employment counsel out there. I apologize, but yes.
I think that's a tricky one, because I feel like tenure limits have like their purpose, right? And I think most of the time their purpose is when you don't have a mature CW program, you don't have a program leader, you don't have an MSP. It's a way to drive out any kind of concerns of bad behavior, sort of. But I think most of us, like, we're seeing truly mature contingent workforce programs building with competent, strong leaders that can manage and mitigate other types of misclassification risk. So I think it's like a little bit of a dinosaur in its way.
It's getting rid of your co-employment risk, because they just move your tenured person into SOW, and then all of a sudden there's no more tenure limit.
No, it's a shell game.
It's smoke and mirrors. Yeah.
And by the way, when they move to SOW, the prices go up.
Yeah, they have a tenure limit, but they also have a very extended exception process for it. So it kind of beats the purpose on many times.
Definitely. Well, this has been amazing, guys. We have a few more minutes left, so I wanted to end this in a optimistic note. So what are you most optimistic in terms of the future of contingent labor?
I mean, I'll jump in and just say, like, this is the future of work.
Yes.
Like, you have seen the trends. People want flexibility. People want to work where they want to work. They want to work on the coolest projects and not necessarily always, be locked into being an FTE. It's just really the way that the workforce is going. It's amazing to see. So I'm super, super optimistic about this workforce. And I think for the first time in a long time, we're having conversations with our senior leadership about how important it is to understand your workforce, understand the costs, get the data analytics behind it, start making those talent decisions. Okay, should we be hiring FTE or going contract? Because this workforce is now so much more rich with talent than it ever was, I think, in the past. And it's one of the most flexible it probably has ever been, because we're now so geographically dispersed. We now have a seat at the table, and it's a huge thing to focus on going forward. So I'm really excited.
Yeah,
definitely.
I think to that point, it's the maturity growth of CW because of the increased amount of talent. So for me, what I get most excited about in my day-to-day is building really inclusive, supportive, productive contractor programs. And now that we're sort of kind of having all of these old ways of thinking about tenure, about how we give, like, you can eat in the cafeteria with the FTEs, you can come to the all hands, these things that drive inclusion and proper retention. Those are the programs that I get really excited about building, because I feel like it's creating a really safe and useful workspace for people that are providing really valuable work and contributions to whatever we're doing at the company that I'm supporting at that time. So I'm excited to have the internal capital and sort of the external approval to really lean into building those programs.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Karen?
I love to look at how far we've come in the last several years from programs that were pretty negligible and didn't get, like Brett said, a seat at the table. Now I feel like we're getting the place where we need to be. It's kind of a staple when it comes to workforce planning and contingent and hiring decisions and procurement decisions as a whole. So I absolutely like that, but also creating those partnerships towards the shared goal for the company and elevating it into the next level. One of our mottos is live your best life, and I feel that this is super appropriate for that.
Definitely. I love it. And Sharon?
For me, I'm just going to say, like, again, I definitely think that if we could be more shift based in what we offer our light industrial workers at DHL, I think the workers would love it. Not being able or not having to sign up for the exact same shift every week, like they would love it. So I just need that AI type of tool to be integrated into a beeline so that not just one of my suppliers or two of my supplier partners have access to it, but I want everybody to be able to have access to it. I really think it would change the workforce. I really do, because people do want that flexibility now.
So you're giving Beeline the roadmap for their product for next year.
I've already shared. I'm like, I would love it. So yeah, they know.
Ed, Renee?
I think I'm most excited to see how CW can help us bring some younger talent in and how we can create a workforce by upskilling and through mentoring and development.
Amazing. I'm excited too. I think this is the future, and the future's temp is perm, basically. Right? It's not really temp. It's part of our society and where we're going with it. And I think it's going to become a bigger and bigger component of the flexibility in the workforce. You guys are all amazing, so insightful. Thank you so much for taking the time today. And I hope we can keep doing this in the future. Brett, thank you for suggesting that we do this.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.